There is this old saying that goes, "The pen is mightier than the sword." Well, if you have studied the ancient world a bit, how physical life was and how violence was an integral part of daily life, I would counter-argue that whoever said that either had a very sharp pen in their possession or a very short and dull sword. We talk a lot about silver, bronze, and gold here in this channel, but what truly controlled the flow of these metals was iron. Iron in the shape of swords, spears, and plates of armor. And behind every ironclad soldier, there was a powerful figure, a general or commander, who dictated the issue and distribution of this wealth. So today, let's get to know some coins issued by some of these generals and what's behind the designs on the coins issued by these powerful men. Let's go! Have you ever wondered why historical records focus so strongly on the military and major figures from within the military instead of normal statesmen? I mean, you can probably from the top of your head think about 3 or 4 major military leaders from your favorite ancient civilization, but I'm sure not many of you can name like 3 or 4 generals from your own country's armies. Yes, the ancient world was a much more violent and militaristic world compared to the one we live in. But when it comes to money, the military was also a much bigger expenditure. The numbers will vary, of course, between countries and the time period, but it is safe to assume that on average and in an overarching scheme, around 25% of all state economies and nearly 50% of yearly empire or kingdom budgets would be spent entirely on military efforts and maintenance of their war machines. This not only meant that people who led these armies as a result were immensely powerful, but the army itself was an essential aggregator of wealth, as of course no one would risk their lives if not for some proper payment. And this money trickled down to the rest of the economy as soldiers would spend it. So monetary policies were also part of the things in mind of most military leaders, or at least the ones who thought about the minimum sustainability of their state budget. So for today, I've brought here some coins minted under some major military leaders. And as we will see, although they all share in common very strong and imposing imagery, the way they communicate their power on their coins has some nice little differences depending on the context. And we start our little history of the military trip going back to the 4th century BC. We're headed to the Great Persian Empire. The Great Persian kings used local governors and generals called satraps to handle their local administration and handle the matters in their respective regions. One of the most notorious satraps of the Achaemenid Empire was Pharnabasos II. Pharnabasos was engaged most of his life being the Persian king's personal bully, being sent on military campaigns to bully and destabilize their neighbors. To pay for these expeditions, Pharnabasos issued a very varied coinage as far as designs goes, to pay the mercenaries from different nationalities that he hired. This leads to our first coin, minted between 380 and 379 BC, as he was preparing to invade Egypt. Among his troops he sent against Egypt, he had 12,000 Greek mercenaries. The typical silver piece used by the Achaemenids was the silver siglos, a small silver coin, but his officials had the very smart idea of issuing, in particular for this campaign, a new type of coin, with a design and a weight standard that would be at the same time usable and recognizable for the local Persian markets, as well as acceptable to the mercenaries he was about to hire. So once we get to our coin here, on the obverse, he picked Baal, the Achaemenid equivalent of the Greek Zeus, seated on his throne and holding a scepter, very similar to a coin we're going to see next. We also have legends in Aramaic on the obverse, which read Baal Tarsos, the god Baal of Tarsos, where these coins were originally minted. So if the obverse of this coin was very pleasant looking already, the reverse in particular just blows me away. This was a coin used to pay for war and to pay for mercenaries. So it was just fitting that the god of war, Ares, would be chosen to be featured here. So we are greeted with his bearded figure, wearing a plumed helmet, and we also have legends in Aramaic around the bust. A really well sculpted side-looking bust, I really like it. But as we leave the Achaemenids behind, I had to move to one of their main enemies and eventual conquerors, the Greeks. And of course, when you mix the words Greek and general, Alexander just pops into everyone's mind. But this one in particular is a posthumous coin. That is, minted under the many generals who shattered Alexander's empire among themselves. And this silver drachma in particular was from Alexander's most hardcore general, Antigonus Monophthalmos, or Antigonus the One-Eyed. This piece was struck between 320 and 301 BC. But before going to talk about the coin itself, it's worth having a look at the man's accomplishments. Antigonus was already a high-ranking officer under Philip II, Alexander's father. In service, he lost one of his eyes during a siege from an arrow, survived, went on to become a general under Alexander, participated on most battles with Alexander, carved himself a kingdom bang in the middle of the other successor states, went to war with these kingdoms for most of his life, and finally met his end at the age of 81, being pierced by multiple javelins as he was leading a phalanx from the front lines at 81. If there ever was a movie about this man, I would like to watch it. Since he was so busy doing war, I think Antigonus didn't worry too much about the designs of the coins. The fact is that he just kept the very well-established system created by Alexander, and the base silver unit of the standard was what we have over here, the silver drachma. So as we can see on the obverse, it has this very traditional and well-known image of Hercules wearing the skin of the Nemean lion, and I feel like I'm always showing this coin design here on the channel, but it has a reason. This drachma depicts one of the most interesting things about ancient coins, which is the vast stylistic variants coins used to have, even if they are from the same denomination and served the same purpose. So here, let me put on screen a series of drachmas from different mints. This is what makes this type of coin fascinating. It's not only about collecting a coin of Alexander, it's about analyzing the art on each individual coin and deciding, almost like an art collector, which style of engraving you like the best. This level of attention to style and to engraving, it's what distinguishes good-looking collections from fantastic collections, and it's something every collector needs to pay attention to. As far as design goes, I think this particular example is really good. The high relief, the small details like in the lips, the lion's mane, and the very strong brow ridge on Hercules' forehead shows us the engraver who made this coin really knew what he was doing. The reverse also follows the classical Alexander design. It shows a very finely sculpted Zeus sitting on his throne, holding his eagle and his staff, and the legends Alexandro make no reference to Antigonus, the real authority behind this piece. It only talks about Alexander. So now let's leave the Greek world behind, because we have a lot of ground to cover with our friends, the Romans. And they really did have a nice portfolio of great generals. So let's start by Germanicus, considered by many from his time as the Roman equivalent of Alexander, a handsome, courageous, brilliant general who had a very quick ascendancy and unfortunately an early, tragic death. This is an as, the base bronze coin struck for daily transactions. These are attributed to the years 37 to 41 AD. Early imperial coins have this very realistic depiction of portraits, probably taken directly from the official busts that were commissioned for the imperial family and distributed throughout the empire. They also tend to be quite wide. This one at around 29 millimeters wide, nearly as wide as a sestertius. So on the obverse we can see the serious portrait of Germanicus, but with very gentle facial features. I'll take the drawing of the coin out so you can actually appreciate the portrait of what he looked like. It's indeed remarkably similar. The legends show his position as adoptive son of Tiberius and adopted grandson of the deified Augustus. We can read, Germanicus Caesar, Tiberii Augusti Filii, Divi Augusti Nepotis. So, Germanicus, Caesar, son of the Emperor Tiberius, grandson of the divine Augustus. The reverse has this big SC at the center, which stands for Senatus Consulto, by decree of the Senate, as they control the issue of base metal coinage. The very busy letters around the device reinforce Germanicus' imperial positions held. So, Caius Caesar Augustus Germanicus Pontifex Maximus, so chief priest, Tribunicia Potestas, with powers of a tribune. But if there is one general and emperor to boot who surpassed Germanicus, and then some, this would be Trajan. He wasn't called the Optimo Principi, the best emperor, for nothing. Stellar administrator, stellar general, efficient, surrounded himself with the best men. He really knew how to take the best people in Rome, including himself, and put them to work. With Trajan, the empire reached its biggest extension, going as far as Mesopotamia to the east. And since I've just mentioned Trajan and Trajan's conquest to the east, I decided to bring a coin from the east. Trajan needed a base, a staging area from where to launch his campaigns, and most Roman generals throughout the years picked Antioch, the third largest city of the empire, as their main staging ground. The Romans had a reasonably loose monetary policy with the east, letting cities strike their own coins and keep all the local denominations to facilitate commerce. Antioch, however, was different. It was important. It had major ties with Rome, and the main trade routes from the east would pass through it. So many efforts were made to bring Antioch's coinage in line with Rome's. A testimony of this effort is this coin here, an as, a typically Western denomination. So let's have a look at it. But as we see on the obverse, the legends are actually written in the language of the land, Greek. What's actually written on the coin? Autocrator Caesar Nero Traiano Sebastos Germanicus is a precise translation from Latin and from what you would find in a Latin as on Rome. The bust of the emperor is also made in imperial fashion. This coin would not be out of place in Rome itself. The reverse shows a laurel wreath, the typical symbol of imperial authority and glory. And the inside legends reinforce the titles held by Trajan at that particular year when the coin was struck. So in this case, with tribunician powers and consul for the second time. So we looked at a general from the early empire, and then we looked at one from the middle empire. So now it's time to look at a great general from the late empire. Emperors Diocletian and Maximianus put a definite end to the terrible crisis of the 3rd century and established what we call the late Roman Empire. This was a time of very thorough reforms, including to coinage. This is an argenteus, a new denomination struck by Maximianus between 286 and 305 AD. The two new co-emperors also reformed the old imperial cult, associating themselves to separate but complementary deities. Diocletian was a skilled administrator and the de facto ruler of the empire, being therefore connected to Jupiter, the king of the gods. Maximianus, however, was a much more accomplished general, being credited mostly with the final stability achieved among the ranks of the military. Therefore, he was associated with Hercules, the strong hero that embodied his military potency, prowess. Together they were Iovi et Herculi, and were commonly depicted on many coin reverses as the two gods congregating and celebrating victory together. So for our coin, we have the schematic bust of Maximian, different from the realistic depictions of old. Notice the very high quality of the silver, something unseen in the empire for a long time. This is a testimony of prestige. The legends are very simple. Maximianus Augustus, Maximian, the emperor. When we go to the reverse, we see Diocletian and Maximian, joined by their respective heirs, the Caesars Constantius and Galerius, sacrificing on the fire altar right in front of a camp gate. The legends, Victoria Sarmatica, celebrate victory over the Sarmatians. The late Roman Empire was a defensive empire, and these defensive structures were spread all over the frontiers to try to stop the invasions from barbarian tribes that were getting more and more frequent. And these were a major propaganda symbol for a good century after this coin was struck. And then for our last coin of the day, let's head back to Antioch, but this time 1,000 years after Trajan, at the First Crusade, where Tankred, now Tankred, Prince of Galilee, established his rule over the city after participating on the main sieges of the crusade and being said to be the very first one to set foot on the city as it was being sieged. By that time, the whole region had a system based on gold, silver, and for small transactions, small copper pieces. The Byzantines had their folies and the tertarterons, the different Islamic countries used the copper fals, and Antioch itself was used to these kinds of denominations without intrinsic value for their day-to-day trade. So Tancred simply adapted the iconography of the coins to reflect his new rulership. This served the purpose just right. It showed people who was the boss while maintaining a well-known coin that would keep trade flowing. So on the obverse of this humble little folies, we can see Tancred isn't for fun and games. We see a stern portrait of him facing right at you, the observer, and he's got his chainmail on and his sword right in front of him. He was a general and wanted everyone to know he would rule the city in military fashion. The reverse is simple, but it's interesting. It clearly draws inspiration on Byzantine reverses of the time, which featured a cross and some kind of evocation for Jesus Christ. This is the case with this one. We have a cross and the abbreviation of the phrase Ixus Christus Nica, or Jesus Christ the Conqueror. Collecting ancient coins means necessarily collecting a small part of the military heritage of the ancient peoples. And if you have a minimally sizable collection, chances are that some of your coins were held by a soldier at some time in its long life. This military theme also makes it one of the most popular and easy to assemble sets to start, since coins with a war thematic are just incredibly common. So this leads me to the very generous sponsors of this video. If you liked any of the coins depicted today, our sponsors at Savoca Coins will be organizing their 113th silver auction next September 19th. Where these and other really great pieces will be up for auction. Their silver auctions focus on higher quality pieces, so if you are looking for quality, for good condition, and for rarities, definitely check them out. There's something for everyone there. Greeks, Romans, medievals, Byzantines, even modern pieces. And if you are watching this video after the auction date, don't worry, just head over to savoca-coins.com and take a look, as other auctions should definitely be happening soon. So now I want to hear from you collectors. Do you have a coin from a famous ancient general figure you particularly like? Or any dream coin struck by a military figure that fascinates you? Let us know in the comment section down below. And please, consider liking this video and subscribing if you liked it. It really helps the channel. So I hope you all enjoyed it, happy collecting, and see you all soon.